Hi there. Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today on Mushroom Hour, we're blessed to have the company of Eugenia Bone. Eugenia is a nature and food journalist, as well as an author and speaker, whose writing is primarily about the connections between food, sustainability, and the natural sciences. Her work has appeared in many books, magazines, and newspapers, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Saveur, Food and Wine, Gourmet, and the National Lampoon, just to name a few. A member of the American Society of Science Writers, founder of Slow Food Western Slope in Western Colorado, and former president of the New York Mycological Society, she has lectured widely in venues like the Denver Botanical Gardens and the New York Public Library. Eugenia is the author of 6 books, including The Mushroom Lover Must Have, Mycophilia, and her most recent work, Microbia, A Journey into the Unseen World Around You. She's currently featured in Fantastic Fungi, that incredible movie that everyone should see, about the magical world of fungi and their power to heal, sustain, and contribute to the regeneration of life on Earth. Her deep explorations into kingdom fungi and the microbial world strike me as an inspiring tale of gastronomic forager turned prolific naturalist and scientist. Eugenia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Wow, thank you for that intro. I'm delighted to be on.
And there's a lot to talk about, both when it comes to mushrooms, all those ways that mushrooms, are such an amazing part of our diet, the microbial world. But before we get into all that, I think one of the most interesting parts of your story is how you became a mushroom lover. And really a naturalist who then went back to school and started studying microbes. So what are the overviews, that arc from where you turned into someone who is such a foodie and a writer into this mycophile and amateur biologist?
I think if you talk to anybody who's fascinated with mushrooms, there's going to be this sort of weird circuitous path to it because we all share a certain kind of eccentricity. Mushroom lovers are all radical at heart. For me, I came out of the food world. I was a writer. I still am a cookbook writer. I developed recipes. And I was a food journalist for food magazines when there were still magazines to write for. And I was especially interested in 2 things: wild foods and preserving foods. And was kind of where I started out, even though I wrote stories mainly about Italian food and a lot of other assignment type things, hunting.
Sure.
Regarding mushrooms, I really, really love to eat and cook wild mushrooms. But in order to find wild mushrooms, you have to know a little bit of basic biology. I mean, you have to know why they grow, where they grow, if you're going to find them. And so I started to do something similar to you. I just hooked up with my local Mycological Society and started listening in to the lectures, and slowly but surely acquired enough mycology to be able to find wild mushrooms when I wanted to find it. Although, as per our earlier discussion, the best way to find wild mushrooms is to make friends far afield and then travel, kind of hard in this day and age, but in general, travel to visit them, because a mushroom hunter will show you his or her grounds if they don't think you'll come back to plunder them the next weekend. But if you have to travel to go and hunt, they're like, oh, they want to show you their grounds because they're proud of them and they're fantastic, and you can ooh and ah and take a load of mushrooms home with you on the bus or whatever. The other way I got into mushrooms was really through fungi, and that was because I was so interested in preserving. And when we preserve, the job is to kill or thwart the growth or disassemble spoilers in our jar, and one of those are fungi. And so I got more and more interested in microscopic life through my passion for understanding how preserving could work. So that's my 2 avenues that led me into this mycology and microbiology sphere that I'm still swimming around with my head just barely above water.
Well, like a lot of people, many people connect with mushrooms, wild food in general, through the stomach, through food. It's the most tangible relationship we can have. Everybody eats. But then there's something about people that are passionate enough where they go to that next step, which is to study the biology of the organisms involved and to really get a deeper appreciation. Now, do you think that understanding of both, basic biology when it comes to fungi, basic biology when it comes to microbes, really improves who you are as kind of a chef and improves your ability to make delicious food at the end of the day with preserving, with wild mushrooms?
Totally. I mean, a little scientific literacy goes a long way in the kitchen. I mean, it
Yeah.
goes a long way everywhere, in the bedroom and in the public sphere. I mean, it's something that so many of us lack. I never thought of myself as a science person. I was an English major, for goodness sake, and I thought I didn't have the gene for science, but it's like a little bit of a translation problem. It's one of the reasons why I like to write about science. I like to write about science the way I write recipes. I mean,
Right.
very precisely, but in an evocative way so that people want to eat it or read it or understand it.
That actually strikes me about your work is how you do weave in narratives and things to make this very factual science kind of breathe and be a little more human and a little more interesting. And, that gets to that idea of science communication that I think you're so good at, which is breaking down some of these concepts and translating it to where someone like myself or some other amateurs can start to grasp and understand these things.
Yeah, I mean, to have that applied scientific literacy, then to take it to the next level,
Yeah.
is just so useful. I mean, it's the difference between knowing in a kitchen scenario, if you have a disc of mold on top of your yogurt, if you understand that fungi live in their food and they grow in every direction, the mycelium, if it's filamentous fungi, they're growing in every direction they can grow, as
Right.
long as they've got food to grow into, then the notion that that disc of mold is only superficial, is only a film, is a
Right.
misunderstanding of the mycology. Will tell you, no, you want to remove that disc of mold, you have to go as deep as it is wide, because
Yeah.
the fungus is growing in every direction it can within its food. So obviously it's not growing above the food, but it's growing down into the yogurt container as well. So there's all kinds of things about the biology that affect how effective you are in the kitchen. I mean, I can think of so many examples. Also, when it comes to just purchasing or collecting mushrooms, just to remember that they're like a fruit or a flower. You're
Right.
going to want to buy them, or collect specimens that are fresh in the way a fruit or a flower is fresh. If they're wrinkled or they got black spots on it, you're not going to buy roses that look like that. Well, so don't buy mushrooms and store them the way you would a fruit. If you wash a bunch of blueberries and put them in a plastic bag in your fridge, how long before they're covered with mold, right?
Right.
Same with a mushroom. Just a little kind of understanding of how they behave, understanding their biology, it gives you clues of how to treat them in the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think this is something that this basic understanding of life sciences, especially as it pertains to food, do you think that's something that everyone can achieve? I mean, I know in your book you describe the process of studying, going back to school, and it doesn't always sound easy, but do you think a basic understanding is something everyone can attain?
Totally, 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 totally. Believe me, if I can do it, anyone can do it. I mean, no way like a super smart person. I'm just curious. To me, the trick to learning stuff is to open up your curiosity, to respect your curiosity, to recognize your curiosity as your true self. If you're curious, you learn what you need to learn. I mean, some of it's tedious. I never got Punnett squares, ever, 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 ever. I'll never be able to anticipate whether somebody's great grandchild is going to have blue eyes or green eyes. It's just not going to work. I'm good with measurements, but not with Punnett squares. Ugh. But by and large, I just jump over the places where I'd sink down into a hole.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm cobbling together some basic scientific literacy, which has even helped me in the COVID era, because I have enough understanding of biology where I can sort of cobble together with data that's available on the news and so on. I can cobble together some ideas of what my chances are if I do certain behaviors. So
Right.
frankly, I'm pretty confident that my potential of getting sick is lower as a result of understanding the nature of virons, which is
Yeah.
what a viral particle is, how it breaks apart. how it doesn't die, it actually disassembles. You can't ride a bike that's in a million pieces. That's how you get rid of a virus. You disassemble.
Well, in that example, do you think that basic knowledge and understanding you have has helped kind of dissipate some of the fear surrounding it for you?
Totally. Also,
Yeah.
in terms of much, and I bet you learned that from your mentor that, knowing something of biology really is liberating in
Yeah.
terms of your own safety. Like Ken Litchfield, your mentor, who's a fantastic mycologist and a wonderfully giving human being. First time I met him was at a talk he did where he put a Amanita phalloides in his mouth and he was doing it. And I was like, holy smokes, stop the presses. This guy's gonna his kidney's gonna start
Call the
melting.
ambulance.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. And he chewed for a while and everybody went, ooh, and freaked out. And then he spit it out, I don't know, in a bucket or something. And he said, you have to metabolize it for the toxins to poison you.
Yeah.
And that was just, boy, what a little trap door in my brain opened up. As a result, now, I've actually eaten mushrooms that are considered poisonous because I know a little bit about how to denature the neurotoxins, whatever that's in that mushroom that would otherwise make me, sick as a dog.
Yeah. And even not going to the extent that Ken does sometimes, it's very vivid and shocking and kind of awesome. Just people understanding that spores can't make you sick and touching the mushroom won't make you sick. Yeah. All that kind of thing is really helps dissipate the fear around it too. I love just to be able to communicate that to people. And when you bring up Ken, like I was telling you before the show, he's someone that really opened up my world into mushrooms. But what was it like for you integrating with this funky mushroom community, and not to kind of project onto it, but you're from Manhattan, you're a food writer. That gives me an idea of a certain kind of person in my head. And what's funny is you were able to integrate with this eccentric, fun mushroom community. What was that like for you? And kind of a broader question, what has the mushroom community given to you, kind of entering that world?
Well, let me switch it around. Yeah. Imagine what it was like for, some of my sophisticated type friends in New York when I would go for dinner and all I could do was talk about mushrooms. And it was just so tedious for everybody else. Or they thought it was gross. Or, then when I got into, when I want to talk about decayers, or I get into my stuff about like bacteria and I say, you want to shake my hand right now, and all that. So, it's all relative. When I started hanging out with the mushroom crowd, I have the benefit of spending a lot of time with Gary Linkoff and his wife, and they were wonderful socially, as are a lot of our New York Club membership. And so what I did is I cooked dinners for them, and I served them nice wines, and I cooked dinners, and I gave them everything that I knew how to give. And in exchange, they talked to me about mushrooms, and I listened and listened.
Yeah.
Then further afield, I found I'm like-minded. I don't care about anybody's background. If they're interested in mushrooms and they've got something to say about them. I mean, I have all kinds of friends that if they were all together in a room with you would be pretty incongruous. Like, what are these people doing together? They're from all walks of life, all financial and educational backgrounds, but they're all into mushrooms. And they all have a little bit of this radical streak where they are fascinated with the verbs of life, the things that push life cycles along. That's what fungi do. They're like the verbs of plants. So if plants are like the noun, right, then the fungi is like the verb. They kill plants, they decompose plants, then they move those decomposed parts into other plants, which they support, and then they defend those plants, as endophytic fungi, right. And then they kill plants, and then they decompose plants, and then so they're like the verbs. They're like the connecting pieces between the nouns that are plants. And so people who think like that tend to get along.
It really, that shows up in your book, Mycophilia, where you're talking to these different groups, the camo kind of weekend warrior mushroom hunter versus kind of the nerdy scientist type. And it really is funny when you get into one of these mycological gatherings, how there are certain subgroups like that tend to be a constant, but I'm always impressed with all the different people it pulls in and how this very fundamental appreciation of kingdom fungi is this really strong foundation for connection. Almost all the other things about our identity, people can see through as superfluous. If you love fungi, then that's a good starting point.
Yeah. It plays a connecting role in nature. Some of them do. Not all of them are connectors.
Right.
Plants are very ineffective connectors. But, they play a connecting role in nature. And then as a topic of curiosity for the human mind, they're connecting us that way too. They are a type of glue. In fact, they're the glue of soil, as you know, from glomalin. It's useful over and over again. So, the connector in the terms of mycorrhizal fungi, but then, they're like gluing together soil particles because their skin or their bark of mycorrhizal fungi or filamentous fungi is covered with that sticky glomalin, sugary stuff that glues together soil particles and keeps everything from, all of the microbes from being swept away with a drop of water.
Absolutely. And in talking with Stephen Axford just the other day, they're studying in Australia how that glue of soil helps retain moisture as well as microbes. And it's just, and it sounds like it's the glue to community as well and to helping people relate in a lot of ways. And fungi is the glue. The metaphor has plenty of legs. Now, you were the past president of New York Mycological Society, which is a particularly unique one. In reading about its history in your book, the fact that the composer John Cage founded it, obviously you've had incredible kind of legendary members like Gary Linkoff and yourself, and actually you both are English majors, which is kind of funny. So just briefly, a little bit about the New York Mycological Society, maybe what makes it unique and where it stands as a club today.
So I think the club was founded by John Cage about 60 years ago. There was always seasonal foraging in the, foraying in the park system, which we have in New York City, quite a large park system. And there was the usual things that go on in the club. There's lectures, there's mycophagy events, and then there's ID nights. But as Gary became more and more active in the club, he was always active. There just came a time where he said, you can foray any time of the year. So we are going to do at the New York Mycological Society a foray every weekend. Somebody or Gary led forays. It didn't matter. There was times, I think, when new people would join the club and there would be a foray on like January 30th and there'd be 2 feet of snow and everyone would be just freezing. And we'd be out there. I mean, I don't foray that much with the club, but because I like to actually pick a lot of mushrooms, so I'm more of a travel to hunt person. But a lot of our members are collecting for identification and our species lists. And so they'll go out in the snow with Gary and they'll be collecting stuff that looks like, dog vomit on pieces of sticks. It's just like, it was so great and so deep and so wacky. But now we have some experts coming out of our club who are masters at little bumps and junk on logs, And then additionally, the club has, I think, made a point. I mean, I don't know if it's an intentional point, but ultimately it is a point that fungi are everywhere. You can find them anywhere. And it doesn't matter if it's like a little swath of grass between the northbound and the southbound roads of the highway. You can still look for fungi there, for mushrooms. They may not be, delicious morels or anything, but there's still this organism. We want to know why they're there and how many, and we want to track their presence. So I think that the New York Club is special because we're an urban club, and we're saying, so what? There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of species of fungi and of mushrooms growing and in Central Park. Come to New York. Come and have mushrooms in Central Park. You look like a bunch of nuts. There's, we find maitake in the graveyards. It's a great place to hunt for maitake here. Yeah, they're under mature oak. I always look for when I'm looking for new hunting maitake grounds, I always look in the phone book. Wait, what was the phone book? For cemeteries that have oak in their name, like Oak Haven.
Oh my gosh.
Really good place to find maitake. The club finds them in the big cemeteries in the city. And you see them with their baskets walking through the cemeteries collecting maitake. It makes me just love my city so much.
That is a perfect illustration. I think gets us to the spirit of the New York Mycological Society, hunting haunted maitakes in the graveyards. But there is something really special when you get an urban community, or I'm always struck by the fact that I think urban areas are probably going to be the places that are most helped by fungi or have the most to gain from partnering with fungi, both in understanding them, doing applied mycology experiments, finding, new food sources when you have a situation where, food supply chains are not maybe as stable as we thought they were pre-COVID. It's useful to have people that are really tapped into the fact that there are fungi available in urban environments. So that's always been something of fascination for me. And it sounds like New York is the perfect place to explore.
Also a great place to grow. I mean, if you're going to grow mushrooms, urban environments are perfect.
Right.
They don't need sunlight, I mean, in Chinatown, there's all of these bean sprouts being grown in basements.
And I have this vision of underground tunnels, even, who knows, even old subway tunnels full of mushroom farms one day.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, if you decommission the subway, what a perfect reuse.
I think in France, they're doing something like that with old parking garages, maybe old subway tunnels. But yeah, there's just this idea that mushrooms have so much to offer to our urbanized environments. A fascinating topic. How much have you changed integrating with these groups, being part of the New York Mycological Society, getting to know the people that you've gotten to know both in New York and through your travels? Not that you were necessarily, this chic New Yorker who didn't know anything about nature, but how have you changed through this journey of entering the world of mushrooms, or how do you think it's transformed your life?
The most transformative has been a confidence that I can learn something I didn't think I could learn. That is more liberating than anything else. When you hang out with your fellow club members, they are not so dissimilar. They're learning stuff too, and some of them are learning really fast. And some people are more involved in microscopy, and others are masters of mycophagy. The bottom line is that through mushrooms, I learned how to learn. It's so liberating. That's what allowed me to go back to study microbiology, for God's sake. It's the most punishing, potentially the most punishing subject, and yet it's next level glorious. Because those critters, they underpin everything.
Appreciating the microorganisms all around us really gives you this multidimensional perspective suddenly that you can't ever go back.
It's like tripping. It really is.
Yeah.
It's like being able to see a color I couldn't see before.
That's a great way of putting it. And I think for a lot of amateur mycophiles, it's probably empowered us in that way as well. That idea that there are things that we can still learn that feel rewarding, that are within our abilities. And because they're so interesting, they kind of challenge us to keep learning. It's much easier to learn when something's inherently interesting and you're passionate about it. So, because you are someone who's so into, now you were someone who was into food and the food world before you got into this mycological sphere. I guess, what was the draw for you for wild foods, wild mushrooms, even preserving, which I associate a lot with foragers or people who hunt wild food because you have to preserve what you find. What was so alluring about wild food?
I think it's just a predilection. Like, I don't like melon. So, I don't know. I like the way wild foods taste. I was exposed to wild foods, as a child, because my dad is Italian American and a terrific cook. And we had a lot of openness in our household about wild foods. But I have to say that my fascination with the hunt is probably the most primal motivation for me. I love the way the foods taste, the way I hate melon. but it's the hunt at the end of the day. So for me, like I'm in Long Island right now, the mushrooms are sandy. They're not that good, but there's a lot of clams. And I get the same rush. I'm okay with that. In fact, if I go too long without hunting some clams or hunting some oysters or gathering some beach plums, then I start to get crabby. So I think it's like some sort of place that I go to that allows me to connect with nature in a really intimate and sort of, it's like a dharma. It's like a practice for me, and I crave the experience and I can't get enough. So my whole mushroom hunting life, I mean, I've gone to far afield to hunt mushrooms before I started to write about them or had a book deal or any of that stuff, I mean,
Right.
this is the authentic place that I was coming from. And it still is. I mean, I've hunted birds and I've hunted boar, and I don't like the guns so much. I like the quiet hunt. I like the moment when pattern recognition, when the veil lifts and my pattern recognition kicks in. I think there must be some kind of neurological change, some sort of pathway in my brain that gets excited when that pattern recognition kicks in. Like when you
Yeah.
see no mushrooms, right? And then all of a sudden you see 10 and you're like, this is so great. It's so exciting.
And a lot of times you just have to find one, and suddenly you'll tune in and realize there's 12 right near you.
Yeah. The same thing goes with clams. But of course, you're not seeing them with your eyes. So what I do with clams, I don't use a rake because you can't really get off the same way. To really get off on your clamming, you get in your bathing suit, you go at low tide, and you kind of sit in the muddy stuff, or you float. And then I know this is a podcast, but I'm like clenching my fingers like I was squeezing a very big lemon, and I just squish through the silt, and I walk with my hands until I feel a clam. And they have a specific feeling. I can feel their contours. Just like it's a type of feeling pattern recognition.
So you're getting very primal, and I can see you have this connection with kind of this primal side of the human biology. We're connected with that idea, that rush of hunting and finding things and feel that tactile sensation.
I think what it does is it floods my brain with like serotonin or something.
Right.
It's just going down these pathways. And as a result, I have an ecstatic experience. So, yeah, I love to eat mushrooms. I love a nice oyster with mignonette sauce. And I'm crazy for clams casino, but it's collecting. It's collecting that is the truly ecstatic part for me.
And I think a lot of people share that, where it's almost, in the modern day, it's the closest thing akin to like a spiritual practice or a meditative practice that a lot of us engage in. So I think that gets us a really good insight into who you are. And then because you are this, someone who's so knowledgeable about food, without getting into an exhaustive list, we can buy your books on preserving and books on recipes if we want to really dive deep. But what are some of your favorite ways to preserve your mushroom finds? What are some of the tricks of the trade, if you will, some practical tricks of the trade, both to preserve and to prepare wild mushrooms? And we can just go through a couple, but I just want to inspire people with some practical tools.
Good, you're asking about preserving, because I just finished preparing for class. I teach at the New York Botanical Garden.
Perfect timing.
So I happen to be up to speed on my mushroom preserving. At the same time, there's the ecstasy of picking. There's a kind of greed that sets in. So if you're able to pick more or collect, more than you need, one does. So then you have a responsibility to preserve this stuff. Mushrooms are a low acid food, right? They're an alkaline food. So the thing about preserving mushrooms is that if you are going to preserve them for shelf stability, like, in a jar, you would have to pressure can them because they are low acid. Or you can water bath can them, but you'd have to acidify them, right? So you'd have to put them into a pickle, whether it's fermenting or just adding vinegar or whatever. You'd have to acidify those mushrooms in order to water bath can them. Now, there's nothing wrong with pressure canning. It's fantastically easy. But the problem with pressure canning wild mushrooms is that there's no USDA data. And it makes sense. They've only done the research on what's available agriculturally, and that would be the
Right.
white buttons, right? So then you're in a situation saying, okay, how can I make my morel mushrooms seem like the same size and density and so on as the white button mushrooms that the USDA has done data for?
Right. Right.
I will never publish those recipes that I use because it's like, somebody could get sick. But I'm confident, and I can tell you how to be confident, but I can't tell you that you can pressure can morels in boiling water, although I do it every year. Otherwise, drying. They love, not all mushrooms, but a lot of mushrooms love to be dried, and then, of course, freezing. And just like with vegetables, in general, you want to stop the enzymatic action of a mushroom before you freeze it, because otherwise you can get these. If you freeze a raw mushroom, you can get these weird metallic kind of off tastes. It's not worth it if you've got a treasured bag of chanterelles and they end up tasting like brass tacks.
I haven't had great success with freezing, but I know that example you use of chanterelle, they don't dry very well and reconstitute very well. So, I've cooked them in butter and frozen them that way. But yeah, it's just interesting to learn all these different ways of preserving, because that is such a key part to foraging. I mean, I love the hunt and that aspect of getting out in the wild, but like the other half, 50% of the foraging work is coming back and saving your find.
Yeah. And it's a responsibility, to throw that stuff out. If it doesn't make you feel bad, then there's something wrong with you.
Something wrong with you.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I developed a whole book of recipes based on stuff that made me guilty to throw away. Like juicing a whole bunch of oranges, and then I throw all those peels in the garbage, and I think, there's something wrong with that. And so I recipes to use them.
That is a big theme in all your work with food, and obviously your work in the life sciences, this focus on sustainability, which I think is such a mind-bending consideration when you're in the kitchen. Like, how can I actually be more sustainable and not throw away as much? I love that aspect of your work. How did mushrooms key you in to studying nature in a deeper way? I mean, how did they lead you down the rabbit hole to the microbiome and that whole world?
Originally, it was just an appetite thing. I just wanted to know what I needed to know to get what I wanted. Right? But it all changed when I started to realize how vast the subject was. And I think this is where I am like probably most of your listeners, where it's like the waters are much, much deeper than you thought. Or any story that has much more profound or has more implications. To be swimming in that water, and for me, it was provocative to learn that I didn't know that mushrooms weren't plants. I mean, I didn't think about it, actually. I was like, who cares? I just didn't even think about them. Yeah. It's like Barry Linkoff used to say. He would go, I went to the movies, and nobody in the movie talked about mushrooms. They acted like mushrooms didn't even exist.
Start seeing everything through that lens.
Yes. And so, but that's how, in a way, it's like finding out, somebody tells you, oh yeah, scientists know how the universe started. They know what the Big Bang entails. They know what was before. And I'd be like, what?
Well, that's very powerful, relating discovery of kingdom fungi to the knowledge of how the universe started. It's kind of that impactful, though, it feels like.
Well, it's the same sort of thing. It's a huge, huge piece of our world that I, for one, completely, just didn't know it was there. And in my ignorance, realized that I was missing out on a lot of action, a lot of excitement, a lot of insight, a lot of kind of filling out the colors in the coloring. But, I was going from a 3-color existence to one with, many more. And then, God, once I got into microbiology, my mind became a kaleidoscope of new realizations about what makes our planet tick.
You got pushed to then study that world because mushrooms opened up this whole idea. There's so much that is known that I can learn about and discover that's going to change my life. And then you get into the microbial world. But I guess what was the inspiration to write a book about it? Maybe it's just as simple as that's what you do. You're a writer. But why did you want to communicate that journey of discovering the microbial world?
As a writer, well, at least what I do is I get excited about something. So I'm not the kind of writer that like has lunch with their agent and then decides what's on trend and then write a book about it. That's just
Right.
not my
Right.
way. I instead become obsessed and tiresome to everyone around me. And then that's my thing. I just get that way. And then I'm not someone who holds it all to myself.
Right.
Although I very much admire people who are self-contained that way. Many times, especially when I'm on a swearing tear, I wish I was a little bit more like self-contained. But the truth is, I want to tell everybody what I've learned. I want to share it. And so it's my job. I've made it my job as a writer to do that in such a way, to write my books so that they inspire others the same way I feel inspired. So I'm sharing in a way that the gift of inspiration, I'm hoping, in
Yeah.
best case scenario, it's sort of like you write a recipe and somebody reads that recipe and they go, I want to eat that. It's not so dissimilar from writing a chapter about mitochondria and have people go, I want to know more about the origin of bacteria in life.
Yeah. And both your books have that feeling, or both the books I've read, Mycophilia and Microbia, both have that feeling of you're kind of pulling us down the rabbit hole with you through your storytelling. It really is uniquely inspiring, I think, because it's not just a communication of just facts. It's kind of this great narrative. And for you, we've talked about it a couple of times. Microbia meant going back to school and taking another shot at going, which I don't know if I could go back to school at this point. That was brave. But to go back to school and learn about something new, what was that experience like, going back to university? And then kind of a broader question, how did that knowledge you gained really start changing your perspective? Or did you notice that as you progressed, that gradually you started seeing the world through a completely different lens as you kept going through the classes?
Yeah. Well, with mycophilia, the way I learned about mycology was from books, from interviews, from lectures, and peer to peer. And that was enough to write mycophilia. So then from mycophilia, I started to get really interested in the gut microbiome. So I started doing the same thing. I was reading books and I'd attend lectures and I talked to other people about them, do interviews and so on. And I got nowhere. I
Wow.
mean, nowhere. I
Yeah.
just didn't know what the hell was going on. I went to the symbiosis because I was really interested in symbiosis. In mycophilia, the two things that turned me on the most was the mycorrhizal fungi
Yes.
relationship that Suzanne Simard was doing, Suzanne Simard was doing, and then the endophytic fungi that live between the cells of all plants. I was super interested in those. And that was work that I was learning from Rusty Rodriguez and Jim White at Rutgers. And so I really was like, symbiosis, man, I want to understand this. So I went to Poland to a symbiosis society meeting. I swear, I wanted to cry every second. I was there. I didn't know what the hell anybody was talking about. I understood nothing. If I read my notes back today, it's just, it was a disaster. And it was not cheap flying to Poland, I'll tell you that.
Right.
So I realized, and I worked on it for a couple of years, trying to get there. In the meantime, I wrote a cookbook. So I kind of tend to go back and forth with cooking. So, the cooking uses some parts of my mind and body, and science uses other parts of my mind and body. And
Right.
so I'm able to do like research one while I'm doing the other. So anyway, I was working and working and working and getting nowhere. And I realized I just don't have the basic biology. I just don't have the basic tools. I don't know what a bacterial cell, I need to know the parts of a bacterial cell. I need to just have I just need to know how life began on Earth, or at least what we know about. even though I tried to go back to school for microbiology, they said, you were an English major? Forget about it. There was nothing for me. So I went back to school for, all I did was a course of study, 1 year course of study in biology. It's like basic biology. It's like
Yeah.
college level biology. And it kicked my ass. I was working all the time. I was so stressed out. I drank so many martinis during that period. I can't even begin to tell you. But it worked. It lifted the veil, as we say. I was able to understand mycology in a deeper way. I was able to understand basic microbiology. I was able to read papers. I mean, not like super, super complicated papers, but I was able to read basic microbiology papers and, in the journals and stuff. And so that's how I went.
Well, and when you're interested in symbiosis, both in those two most vivid examples that I think everyone's fascinated by, endophytic fungi and mycorrhizal fungi, you quickly do enter the world of microorganisms, and you quickly enter the world of basic biology terms that if you don't know them, you get lost pretty quickly. So it would make sense that when that is your passion, you need to kind of get the tools together to be able to speak the language, if you will.
Yeah, that's totally what it is. It's a language and it's liberating. I mean, but it's also a conceptual language. So the notion that whether it's a fungus or, well, let's say a fungus, that it will break apart a molecule and that its quote unquote poop is the part of the molecule it leaves behind.
Right.
It's not like our kind of metabolism. Bacteria do that too. They take some molecules and they leave others behind. And in doing so, they change environment. And when environment changes, species change. We're talking about evolution. That's the environment that selects who survives the day. Whoever's got the ability to survive the environment of the day. And that environment is created by life. Every second, every minute.
So it's not really a chicken or the egg question. I mean, when you think about animals and plants, which is kind of our immediate association with an environment, it sounds like it's really starts with the microbiology and the fungi that really build the framework for any of that other stuff to exist.
Totally. And think about it. I mean, it's the microorganisms are at the bottom of the food chain, especially the prokaryotes, the bacteria and the archaea, the ones that, fungi are eukaryotes. You know this, like us. They have this
nucleus
in their cell. Plants, animals, protists, fungi, they're eukaryotes. And then the prokaryotes, that's everything else. There's a lot of them, but they're not bigger than one cell. They're just one cell big. That's the smallest thing something can be, right, in life. And those critters, they are at the bottom of the food chain. They're the first biotic thing. And in fact, bacteria, they create food, or they manifest food from abiotic sources. So they can turn gas, they can dine on gases, which are abiotic, and by growing and in reproducing, they are biotic, they become the bottom of the food chain. They're the link between the non-living and the living. Yeah. They turn the non-living sphere into life, which the rest of us feed going up the trophic scale. I mean, I love that.
It totally changes your perspective on the world and makes you realize how important it is to have a healthy population of these prokaryotes. I mean, these small bacteria so how do they play a role in our gut health? Because of course that would be your interest as a foodie, as just a gastronomical explorer. How do these microorganisms play a role in our gut health?
Right? It's funny that I'm back to the tummy again with this subject.
Can't get away from it. Yeah.
No. So it's a complex ecology, but it's really, for me, the most mind-blowing thing I learned about the microbiome in our guts is that they function according to many of the same ecological rules as animals in a park. You probably remember from school yourself this story. Yellowstone Park, the wolves were killing the local ranchers, sheep and stuff. So the Parks Department said, okay, we're going to get rid of the wolves. They get rid of the wolves. The elk population goes way up. The elk don't have to be running around so much, so they start hanging around the stream banks. They're beating up the stream banks. They're eating all the willow. When there's no willow, then the beavers don't have anything to grow to make their beaver dams, which doesn't slow down the stream. So without a slow stream, you don't get nesting ducks and all that stuff. So you have catastrophic ecological catastrophe. So then in the 90s, ecologists said, let's put the wolves back in, see what happens.
Yeah.
In short order, the wolves went back in. The elks diminished in population numbers, and they stayed on the hoof. So they're eating here and there, and they weren't like concentrating on the stream banks. The beaver came back, built their dams, slowed the river down. The ducks came back, and so on. Ecological balance was restored. Same thing is true in your gut. There's no like good bacteria or bad bacteria. Not like the elk are bad, right?
Right.
That's just the wrong numbers for the ecosystem. There was just too many for the ecosystem, and it created dysbiosis, which is unwell living. It's like the word for unwell living. So the same thing is true in your gut. You don't have good bacteria, bad bacteria. You just have the wrong populations of certain bacteria species that disrupt ecological balance in your gut. So if you have this horrible gut infection, C. diff, Clostridium difficile, which causes, like, it can even kill you. That causes terrible, like, diarrhea, and, people lose all this weight. It's a nasty, nasty infection of the gut. Well, we probably both have the spores, the endospores, the sort of resting phase of this bacteria in us right now. Because they're ubiquitous. They're this is a ubiquitous species. But somebody who's got an infection, that species it had an opportunity to expand beyond its previous niche. It took over its habitat, took over the habitat. For whatever reason, all the microbes that had been filling all the rooms in the hotel in their gut, all the microbes that had been present, there was some kind of evacuation, maybe from a lot of antibiotic use or something, and that little endospore was able to make a stand and increase and increase and increase. So what makes you sick in your gut is when your population ratios are out of whack.
So dysbiosis really just comes from an imbalance of the microorganism population. And I love that analogy because you would think getting rid of the wolves would be a good thing. We have these associations of good and bad. And so I know a lot of people think in those dichotomies. So it's really interesting to think, no, there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. It's just these are different populations. We need all of them to really have a healthy gut. Now, what are some ways to really maintain gut health? And this is something that I think personally has been so important as I've met more and more people who have issues with the gut, and it seems to affect every aspect of their life. Maybe we could talk about that. What are some ways the gut can kind of skein out and affect you in deeper ways, issues with the gut? And then what are some ways that we can keep the gut healthy and keep those microbial populations in alignment?
There's a lot of things going on in there. And on a very simple, sort of the way I'm understanding stuff, which is not deeply medical or complex. So I have to say those caveats because I'm not expert.
She's not a doctor, nor does she say she's a doctor.
So your gut wall is only like one cell thick, your colon wall, right? Your lower GI. Right. It's really, we have most of your bacteria. That's where the biggest collection of bacteria live. You got them all over, but there's a lot in your lower GI. Well, that cell wall is just one cell thick. It's really thin, but it's corrugated, so there's actually a lot of real estate. And sitting on top of that corrugated cell wall, there's this mucus layer. And it's like a protective, it's sort of like a prophylactic. And sitting on top of the mucus layer are all of these bacteria. And they're filling all the spaces. They're filling all the rooms in the hotel. They all have a space where they're living. And what those bacteria do is they're mixed species, and there's also fungi in there, viruses, but they're predominantly, from what I understand, fiber fermenters. That means that they like the fiber, the stuff, they're saprobes. They break down plants. They also like chitin. They like the chitin, which is what the mushrooms are made of.
Yeah.
So that's a prebiotic. The prebiotics is bacteria food. It's stuff that's going to feed those fiber fermenters that are living on top of that mucus layer. Now, if you don't feed enough fiber to those fiber fermenters in whatever form you get the food that the fiber fermenters eat. So like, an Inuit is not eating a lot of fiber. Well, they're actually feeding their fiber fermenting. They're feeding those same kinds of bacteria with fermented milk. So, different cultures find their way to supply food to their microbiome. If they're getting the food they need, they stay in healthy populations. But if they don't, and they decrease in populations, then it kind of creates these bald spots. There's not as many of them. And they're really important because they also cue the cell wall of the lower GI to make mucus. So then you don't have that much mucus then. Then before you know it, there's like these bald spots where it's only one cell thick between what's going through your body, all kinds of things, and your bloodstream. You ever hear about leaky gut?
Leaky gut, yeah.
Well, add a few other situations to it, and you get these little gaps between those cells and the cell wall, and molecules, all kinds of stuff can float through. Your immune system is patrolling the outside of your colon all the time, checking things out. You start seeing those little molecules leaking through, freaks out, sets up an immune response, an inflammatory response. And if you have that inflammatory response over and over and over again, you can get disease. The short answer is eat an apple with the skin on every day.
An apple a day. It's really that simple.
Keep the doctor away, but so those microbes will stay. You really want to take it all the way.
Oh, I love this. An apple a day, the microbes will stay. You'll keep the doctor away. We take it all the way. That's fascinating. And I think, does this knowledge of the gut microbiome, has that really changed your relationship with food? As someone who had such an intimate relationship with food, has it changed your relationship with food? Maybe how you cook, maybe even what you eat?
Not that much. To be honest with you, I'm not I love food, so I've always cooked homemade food. I'm also not in a food desert where it's very hard to find the foods that, fresh foods and things like that. But for me, I haven't changed my diet with this knowledge. I've just kind of been liberated from not knowing, because not knowing is a kind of prison, it's just not realizing. I don't know, it's like a respect for the ecology. Your gut is like Yellowstone Park, and all these populations live in ratios to each other, and it's not like you can do so much to affect it. You'd have to be really extreme, but it's more like, this is how I work. And the beauty of it to me is that it works the same way as, it's like my gut and my yard. They function the same way. For that matter, my mouth, my interior, my mouth and Central Park, they function according to the same rules of nature. And to me, that's like encountering a religious dogma that is inspiring. And I love it. It's enlightening. But, I still have just chocolate after dinner every night. So what?
What's nice, though, is that the answer, understanding the inner workings enters you into this world of complexity. But what's nice is that the answer to do the best we can for that complex system is really simpler than it would seem. Eating fresh fruit and vegetables, those kind of things that we all know are good already.
And people who are sick, of course, dealing with stuff like Crohn's disease, that's big time, a lot of problems. Against C. diff, right, Clostridium difficile infection, that the fecal transplant works so well.
Okay, so they're getting some of those microorganisms back.
Well, here's the thing, right? So think about it if it's like Central Park. You just say, okay, the beaver are going down. So maybe the solution to the problem in Yellowstone Park that lacks its wolves, more beaver.
More beavers, yeah.
Add the beavers, right? So a fecal transplant and a little bit of it is like, and first thought, you would think it's sort of like, let's just add more beavers, because you don't know really what makes it work. It's just some stool from a healthy donor, and it colonizes and it pushes out. Maybe it works because those are your evolutionary or Homo sapien symbionts, and they kind of push those Clostridium those C. diff bacteria out of the way because, they're more suited, right? The ones
Right.
in the transplant are more suited. But it turns out that the reason why it might work, this is beautiful. Are you ready? Keep your head screwed on for this one. There was a small study done in Germany, where the researchers put the fecal matter through a sieve. They took out all the bacteria, and the only thing that was left was some little secondary metabolite, just some little molecules, stray molecules and viruses, which were too small, so they went through the sieve.
Right.
And then they shot that stuff up into the butts of the people with C. diff,
Yeah.
and they pulled out well.
Oh, okay.
The thinking is it was the viruses, because viruses are the primary antagonists of bacteria.
So they were attacking the C. diff.
Yeah, they introduced a predator.
Oh, so it wasn't adding more beavers.
No, they added wolves.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I just love your analogy because it's helping me conceptualize it without feeling too kind of squeamish. I really love that basic understanding. And I mean, even when you broke down something so simple as why fiber is good for our gut. I didn't know that. You just know to eat fiber. And so adding that layer of knowledge of here's why that works.
Yeah.
It's just satisfying, and it fleshes out that knowledge in some way that makes it feel, it's empowering. It's definitely empowering.
Yeah, totally.
Did you get any more insights about those wondrous mycorrhizal fungi and endophytic fungi that became passions of yours? Did you get more insight into those through your studies of basic biology and the microbiology that kind of lifts the veil in some of those relationships too?
For me, it helped me actually see, and I mean that literally, not metaphorically, because, the bummer about microbiology is that it's invisible. It's kind of a hard thing to get excited about.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to hold things in your mind that you can't see. That sucks. But by studying it, eventually kind of get used to the idea of it. And so imagining or holding in my mind something as small as a single cell and what its lifestyles might be and its interactions might be and how it might share genes with other cells, that was extremely helpful because so much of fungal life functions on that scale. I mean, we see mushrooms, they're macroscopic, right? But fungi are really microscopic.
So much of the life of fungi is out of our vision, yeah.
So studying microbiology helped me literally see in my mind's eye what a fungal cell might look like, or a string of fungal cells, like in a filamentous fungus. And that helped me conceive certain things and come to certain, in a way, no-brainer kind of conclusions, but is very helpful when I'm communicating basic science to somebody else. It's sort of the way the way I'm able to remember things. For example, because of the fact that fungi are so small, they are not big enough to have a stomachs, right? They take down their food outside of their bodies. As a result, fungi need to live in their food, right?
Yeah.
As a result of that, fungi can only be as big as their food. So a blueberry that has been infected with a fungal spore will become food and world and shape of that fungus.
Right.
The fungus colonizes the blueberry, and unless there's another blueberry nearby, that's the fungus. That's a mycelium. That's its entirety.
Yeah.
Or it could be as big as a mountaintop. If the spore landed in a forest on a mountaintop, and it turned out that that particular spore species was programmed to eat the trees on that mountaintop.
It gives you new models to get insights that, like you said, they're intuitive. And I'm like, yes, of course. But it helps you find that when you know at that microscopic level what's really going on.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, it also opens up this world of just being able to ask questions like, well, in an endophyte, is it really the plant that's giving you, if you're talking about a plant with medicinal qualities, is the plant giving the medicinal qualities? Is it the fungi, or is it the microorganisms? What is really at the heart of who's responsible?
Yeah. But actually, like anything, it's a community. Think of it like an orchestra. Maybe that's what it really is.
I like that.
I've often thought, wow, how much effect do endophytic fungi have on the flavor of foods, on the flavor
Yeah.
of plants, right? Who knows? I don't know. I think somebody could do a nice PhD on that one.
But I like that idea of it's an orchestra too, because in talking with various folks, it does seem like sometimes it's only that endophytic fungi in that plant that creates X flavor or X benefit, or so it really is that orchestra. And I think that's something that I'm coming away with the study of microbiology. It must be hard for you now to see any organism in a vacuum.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And that's why it has a spiritual dimension,
Yeah.
because one can apply that thinking to anything in life. And with that thinking comes responsibility. When you
Mm.
realize that nothing is in a vacuum, then there's no way that you can skirt your responsibility to others because
Wow.
nothing is in a vacuum. So it's, to me, science as mycology as moral instructor, if you will.
But mycophilia, mycology really is basically can be a religion. I know a lot of mushroom people, it already is. Mushrooms are their
Yeah.
religion.
You
Yeah.
know, it means at the end of the day that you take moral responsibility for the other life forms around you, human, animal, plant, fungal, and to the extent possible, bacterial and prokaryote, and archaeal. Then that's enlightenment, I guess.
Well, and that may be another reason why it's good to study them so we can visualize our precariat brethren and have that compassion. Even though we can't see them, we need those good mental models so we can have some compassion. Well, that's fascinating to just take a periscope into the micro world with someone who's done a lot of work in being able to communicate this. And I think you have a great way of helping me kind of visualize some of these big ideas on a small scale. But now going back to that macro picture, there are so many. Right now, we're in this era of mycophilia, and this appreciation for fungi is exploding into the culture, and I'm one symptom of that. So, what are some of the ways that you think, some of these big ways that you think fungi are really going to change the planet, maybe even in the next, 10, 20 years?
Well, I think that the work that's being done on endophytic fungi is going to be
Mm.
huge because, and is already, but I think it's really going to make a serious impact because endophytic fungi, as you may know, they can provide stress tolerance to plants that help plants survive salt inundation, drought, and extreme temperatures.
Wow.
They play an important role in a plant's survival, and they're very, very ancient. Their relationship with plants, it predates terrestrial diversification of plants. So they help plants get onto land because, it's nice and cool in the oceans. But then once you hit land, it's great. Had a lot of real estate, a lot of sunshine, but also was dry and it was hot. So endophytic fungi living between the plant cells help plants make transfer from the ocean to the land. So they're an ancient symbiote.
I know that about mycorrhizal fungi, but I didn't think about that with endophytic fungi. But of course, they would work in concert to help plants move from this aqueous solution of nutrients into really a harsher environment.
Yeah. And that relationship continues. But because it's so ancient, it's turned out that the benefits or the tolerances that endophytic species allow for one kind of plant can easily be transferred to another.
Mm.
So salt tolerance, the endophytes that help certain grasses, seagrasses, survive salt tolerance,
Yeah.
can also be applied to rice plants, right?
Okay, it just dawned on me how huge this is, that applied potential.
Yeah, it's so huge that even like the bad guys are going, wow, we're getting in on this. Like Monsanto is all over
Oh,
this.
God.
Of
No.
course, they go
Yeah,
follow the money. They're
sure.
immoral. They're going for the money. And it is definitely, and this is a huge field. It's like every country's got some play in it. It's super, super implications for the future of agriculture and changing climate. Things like endophytes collected on grasses. A lot of these are grass endophytes, which is interesting in and of itself. But these grass endophytes that are growing on grasses that grow in, again, in Yellowstone, but where the the hot springs are. It's very, very, very hot soil there. Those endophytes can be transferred to tomato plants. Subsequently, the tomato plants are able to produce like tomatoes at 120 degrees.
Okay, this has a huge potential.
Yeah.
Do we have any of the same concerns? I mean, it's not really genetically modifying the organisms, but it kind of is. I mean, you're adding endophytic augmentation to organisms that might have them natively. I don't know, is there anything to be concerned about there? Or is this kind of a more holistic way to add tolerances to plants and change plants to better suit our environment? Is this kind of, in your mind, obviously you're not in the lab necessarily doing the work, but in your mind, is this a little more holistic way of doing it than GMOs?
I just don't really go there. I mean, I think that the whole GMO thing doesn't scare me that much. I don't think it's a good idea to. The problem to me with it is that when you're blasting radiation at a plant and trying to create the mutations, right? That's how the GMOs are done, or some of the GMOs are done. The problem with that is you're changing things so fast you don't know what kind of nutritional deficits might happen as a result, or it's just like a little bit of working in the blind. But in this case, I suppose the endophytes could be doing other jobs that could be freaky, but I don't know.
Just went on an assumption there about you. I don't want to have you have to make a statement about GMOs. I know that's kind of a huge topic, but I'm just thinking like, would that have anything to be concerned about? Or
I mean, if you have a Siamese cat, it's a GMO cat.
Yeah. I'm hearing my grandfather's a chemist, my dad's a biologist, and they both didn't have problems with it. And they were like, this happens all the time in nature. So anyway, but that potential seems really limitless if we can find what endophytes are responsible for what relationships. And I'd imagine there'd be potential of rejection if the plant doesn't accept that fungi into kind of the cell membranes. Yeah. So a very exciting part of science.
Because the relationship between these endophytes and plants predates diversification, the endophytes are curious. They're okay. They'll go with you. They'll go with her. And
I see what you're saying. Right. Just the fact that you have a cell wall and you photosynthesize, you're a candidate. So we'll look at that as kind of this emerging field 10, 20 years, because I'm innately fascinated by it, but that's just an applied method that really blows my mind. Because that's one thing in talking with people about mycorrhizal fungi is we're still figuring out how really that can be applied, especially at scale, because the relationships there are so intricate, and in situ in nature is a much different environment than what you can make in the lab. But it sounds like endophytes, because they are so ubiquitous across plants, it's a much easier jump to start using that in an applied way. Really interesting.
You could buy, potentially, endophytes for a bad summer and make sure that your plants don't wilt.
Wow. So
Think about this. Maybe endophytes could help people have gardens on rooftops in urban environments where it's so hostile, the soil buckets just dry out immediately. And
glad I asked that question. And do you see fungi?
People to talk to about that. There's some fantastic research scientists working on it.
I may have to pick your brain for that, because I would love to attempt to read their scientific papers and try to have a intelligent conversation to learn more, because it's something that innately fascinating, and you've just opened up huge potential to how it could affect society. And then I know you do teach some classes about psychoactive mushrooms, about psilocybe and things like that. How do you see that in the next 10 to 20 years as maybe changing medicine or changing our ideas of therapy? Is it already doing that? I'm near Oakland, where it's become a huge topic, and the familiarity and the use of psilocybin mushrooms in a therapeutic setting has just skyrocketed. So what do you see as that potential? What are your thoughts there?
What is it? 1 out of every 15 Americans suffer from depression at some point in their lives. It's just this huge, huge problem that our species has. And we haven't had a new drug to treat depression and some of these other problems that are terrible, like PTSD, alcoholism, OCD. I mean, there's a number of these sort of cluster of these problems that psilocybin, or psilocin more accurately, seems like it could be effective type of medicine. I cannot imagine. I think it's utterly immoral not to be full hog working on figuring out how this drug can be utilized to help people, and to even help people that aren't sick, just for self-revelatory purposes. But primarily for me, the folks that are suffering from these horrible conditions like depression, God, they should have access to anything and everything that can be made available. So I am very, very optimistic that in the future there'll be therapists you can go to who will be able to treat you with this drug. And I think it's happening. It's following the same pattern as marijuana, and it's just a matter of time. A lot has happened pretty fast, all things considered. So they used to tank your career to study this stuff, but Roland Griffith opened it all up, even though I think rogue therapists have been at work for it. I know they have for all along, treating people for a variety of conditions. But yeah, I think it's very exciting for one of our most intractable and heartbreaking illnesses.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your viewpoint. I think anyone who knows someone who's struck with depression, it really is like an illness. There's not just snapping out of it. Why aren't we exploring every tool at our disposal? I really appreciate that perspective. We didn't really talk about your movement across the country and your trips all over the country foraging, but as someone who has traveled the nation talking to mycophiles and going to clubs and going to competitions for morel foraging and everything else, if you could pick one, what is one of your favorite places to mushroom forage?
Well, I love hunting burns for morels. I love hunting burns. There's something so powerful about the energy and force of nature that a burned forest represents. And something so incredibly optimistic about all those little things that are coming up and life returning. It's that combination of awesome power, awesome destructive power, and but resilient, green, and in the case of morels, golden or brown or black, resurgence of life. That's my favorite place. And lately, I've been going to the Sierra Nevadas. I hunt with a guy named David Campbell, who's got a little outfit called Myco Ventures. Highly recommend for burn morel hunting. Since you're already there, you should know David. He's really an incredible mushroom hunter, really knowledgeable, great guy, but just don't piss him off because he might leave you in the woods.
Well, it's funny because this is the first year that I went to the Sierras to do some burn morel hunting, despite living in the Bay Area for 8 years. There really is something magnificent and something eerie about walking through a burned forest. You're getting soot on your clothes. It's definitely...
It has an incredible sound, right?
Yeah.
The sound of the trees, they're all like creaking and moaning, and it's just, wow.
That's a great one. That is a very unique place to hunt mushrooms. And of course, you get the morel, which I know for you has been central to your whole mushroom journey, is the search for the morel mushroom. So... Well, the last thing I was going to ask you about was the film that has been on the tip of everyone's tongue that has completely kind of inoculated whole new generations of people into a love of fungi, and that's Fantastic Fungi. For you, what was the experience like of being part of that film? What do you think the kind of lasting legacy of that film is? How has being in the film changed some aspects of your professional life, maybe?
So I met Louis early in his process. His producer had read Mycophilia, and that's how, we got connected. And he was interested in me in terms of someone who cooks mushrooms. But then we spent a lot of time talking about basic mycology because he didn't have that background and he wanted it. So we had all these conversations, and we kind of, he got some ideas about mycology, I think, from our conversations, and we got closer and closer. But ultimately, I was like, for Louis and all the people in the film, the way the folks have been inspirations to me, and folks like Ken and Paul Stamets have been inspirations to you.
Right.
Fantastic Fungi is ultimately Louis' journey discovering mushrooms. That's what it is. Just like Mycophilia is my journey discovering mushrooms. And your podcast, The Mushroom Hour, is your journey discovering mushrooms. That's what Fantastic Fungi is. It is Louis's journey and his vision, his eye. He's a filmmaker, and he does that incredible stop action stuff. And so I use words. You use words. He uses images,
Yeah.
But that's what that film is. It's an expression of his discovery, and he did a great job sharing it. That's why I think people love it, because he's honestly sharing a fantastic story from nature. He's great. They're all great. All those folks are wonderful.
Yeah, it was a really inspiring movie, I think, for people at any level of their mycological journey. And I just know so many people that saw that movie and it kind of opened up their world to fungi. So that would make sense that he's authentically sharing his journey. And through that, people kind of find themselves in it and take the journey with him.
He's
That's one
launching,
of the most
and we
beautiful
all
things, to be able
launch
to
each
send people
other.
on their own journeys. And then who knows when they're going to circle back and tell you about some endophyte research they're doing down the line, or some research, something growing mushrooms. It's just,
Because every once in a while I get a letter from somebody and they go, I read your book and now I'm studying mycology in college. I'm like, yes, it's so great.
mission accomplished. Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit then about any future plans for your work. I know we're in an era where future plans are kind of always in flux, but are there any more books on the horizon? Maybe any mushroom hunt trips that are coming up for you that you got on the calendar? What's in the future for Eugenia?
Well, I have various forays that are more closer to home that are planned. I'm involved in a fantastic fungi project right now where we're setting up a recipe sharing platform on the fantasticfungi.com. So what we'll do is we'll allow everybody in the community to put up their mushroom recipes and their photographs of the mushrooms. And I'll help and make sure people don't put like a raw morel crudo recipe up or something like that, which you get everybody sick, or, my favorite, I'm going to eat a phalloides dish, so I'll be helping with that, as well as some other associated projects. But right now we're doing that, and it should be up, I think, another 2 weeks.
Just to give us a teaser, what is one of your favorite mushroom recipes that you can recommend to people? And it could be anything like porcini, chanterelle, whatever it is. What's one of your favorite mushroom recipes?
One of my favorites is porcini crudo. So this is when you have a young, hard bolete, right? Not a big, mature, bosomy bolete, but a really kind of nice, tough little baseball of a bolete. You slice it like on a mandolin, ideally, so you have very thin slices.
Yeah.
And then all you do is treat it with a little olive oil and some salt, and then you shave some Parmesan cheese on it. It's one of the few mushrooms that you can eat raw and not worry about any GI issues. And it is essential. It's the essential, that's, I'd have to say, is among my favorite dishes.
Well, porcinis are one of my favorites, so I'm going to remember the porcini crudo. Now, Eugenia, where can people find you? Where can people find your work? Obviously, we'll put links up in the show notes, but where is the best place for people to connect with you?
Well, I have a website, eugeniabone.com, and on that website we put up my classes that I teach at the New York Botanical Garden, the talks, whatever talks I'm giving are up there, as well as articles that I've written or writing currently, that are currently in print. And then my books are all available at the usual, at all internet booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie. So.
Like I keep saying, it's this great blend of storytelling and science that I just love so much. It's fantastic. Now, I've got a couple thoughts that I ask all my guests before they leave us that always give really thought-provoking answers. No pressure. But the first one is, what is a mushroom that you love and why? I know we just got a recipe. We know you love porcini. I know you have Italian there as well, so you have to love porcini. What's another mushroom that you love and why? And it doesn't have to be a favorite, just one that's fantastic and fascinating.
I'm very excited by a lot of different fungi species, things they do, ways they live, plants they help. But ultimately, I think the mushroom I love the most is the one that enters my dreams. Like a lot of mushroom hunters, I dream about mushrooms, but I always have the same dream. And it's been going on for years. I just had a recent, like 2 nights ago. My favorite mushrooms are the mushrooms I find in my dream, and they are always very, very large, squishy, deformed morels growing in decaying formal gardens. And so I wander in these formal gardens that are all overgrown, and I look underneath the shrubbery, and there are these grotesqueries. And I have ecstatic, it's like having a wet dream. I have these ecstatic feelings at collecting these mushrooms. How's that?
I love that answer. And hopefully there's no other mushroom hunter crawling around ready to pick it from the other side of the shrubbery.
No, not in the dream.
I've always wondered about looking at the meaning or the symbology of mushroom dreams. Like, which mushroom do people dream about? What does that mean about them? Because for me, it's chanterelles. I dream that I find these big golden mounds out in the forest. So it's interesting. Morels and formal gardens. One day we'll know what that says about us on
Wouldn't that be great?
a deeper level. And then what has that relationship and that exploration and understanding of kingdom fungi given to you? What has it brought to your life, your experience?
Well, entree into science, which I always feared.
A powerful one that I think so many people share.
Yep.
So it doesn't get much better than that.
Look at us. So there we go. Yep.
Now we're matching. And then what is the lasting impact that you hope to make with your work? And if, it doesn't have to be your individual legacy, but what do you hope you're contributing to with your whole body of work when it comes to mushrooms, maybe when it comes to microbiology, food as well? What do you hope you're leaving behind for people to get inspired by?
There's some writers who will affect generations of people. I don't think I'm one of those writers. So if in the moment somebody reads my books and says, I think I'm going to go out and mushroom hunt, or I think I'm going to study deeper. If in the moment I inspire someone to try to preserve a food or make a recipe, then I've touched them. I matter. I exist. Once I'm gone, the dead don't care.
That's really all we can hope for, right? Is to inspire people to explore the things that have empowered us and given us so much. And you have a unique gift for doing that as a writer. So, well, Eugenia, thank you so much for just sharing your time with us, sharing your personality, your vivid imagery. And it's just been a joy to talk to you and get your perspective. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. This was great. I haven't had this much fun in a long time.